Alright, here are my 3 designs I'm using for inspiration. They're all built the same way. You start with a mold, place a few pieces of wood inside, and then fill the rest with epoxy. You can make these in just about any shape. The one on the right is circular, but the process is identical. It's about as simple as it gets, which is kind of part of the charm. For mine, I'm sticking with a rectangular shape. It's clean, it's balanced, and it's easy to work with. Now let's talk epoxy. Even with a basic pour, you can get some beautiful swirling patterns once it cures. Kind of that hypnotic, glassy look that epoxy is known for. The one in the bottom left adds rocks for texture, which gives it some nice dimension. I'm not a huge fan of the rocks themselves. This is probably a really heavy cutting board, but I like the idea of using that empty space in the epoxy to add something interesting. Next up is the color. Blue tones are nice, but feel a little too safe. The reddish pink one looks good, but lacks any sort of strong theme. So for mine, I'm going Halloween theme. Oranges, purples, and deep tones that capture that spooky autumn night vibe. And here's where I want to take it just one step further. Lights. None of these examples use lighting, but I think embedding LEDs inside the epoxy could look really amazing. Will it work? I have no idea, but I'm gonna give it a try. All right, let's sketch this out. Super simple plan. I'll start with a rectangular mold and a wooden base. Then I'll pour in epoxy tinted in those Halloween colors. Think oranges and purples. I'm hopeful that the combo of the dark wood base and the orange sky will give me a foundation to add a little creativity to. Some sort of Halloween themed silhouette. Buried inside the epoxy will be my string of LED lights to give that subtle, eerie glow. And on top is where I'll add my silhouettes. Maybe trees, maybe a scarecrow or a haunted house scene. I'm not quite sure yet, but I think that'll really finish out the look. This one should be pretty straightforward. Simple concept, big visual payoff. Let's get to work. Here's what I'm using for this project. A nice big slab of walnut for my ground. This will give my trick-or-treaters something to walk on. I've got these resin mold trays and some 2-part epoxy resin. Powdered dyes for the Halloween sparkle and a strand of LED lights for the background. Finally, I've got some black cardstock for my paper silhouettes. Basically, this is arts and crafts just with power tools. The first step is to trim the walnut down to match the width of the mold. Then, to make it look like a rolling ground for my trick-or-treaters to walk on, I'll sketch a little wavy line and cut it out with the jigsaw. Now, I'll admit I've never done this part before, and I'm not totally sure if the resin is going to stick to this mold. Now, when I scramble eggs, I usually use olive oil, and they don't stick, so I'm taking the same approach here. It's sprayable Pam to the rescue. I'm not sure if that's officially recommended. I doubt that it is, but we will soon find out. Next up, I've got to figure out how to turn the lights on and off once they're sealed inside this resin. My plan is to sink the switch right into the walnut so you can reach it from underneath. Since the light strand needs to run through the wood, I'll start by drilling a hole clean through the walnut and feed it up through the resin layer. Then, on the underside, I need to make a little pocket for the on-off switch to sit in. And for that, I'll go back to the drill press. I'm going to try drilling a series of holes in a straight line with the drill press set to a certain stop depth, which is going to match the size of my on-off switch. Then it's really just a matter of connecting the dots and going to progressively larger bits to take out all that material. It's a little rough looking and not exactly my finest woodworking moment, but hey, in some cases, it's concept over cosmetics. Function first for this one. Don't look too closely at it, but it'll work. Then to make sure the epoxy doesn't flow backwards into the wood, I'll fill it in with some hot glue. I think that should work. Okay, before we pour, let's talk a little bit about the resin, specifically two-part epoxy. It comes in, you guessed it, two parts. One is the resin and the other is the hardener. And when you mix them together, they kick off this chemical reaction called polymerization. Basically, it's a bunch of tiny molecules linking up to form this really super strong, solid piece of plastic. The mix has to be just right, so too much hardener can get you this kind of brittle epoxy. Too little may never fully set, and you're stuck with a, well, piece of garbage. All right, time for some color. Orange for that fiery Halloween glow, and a touch of purple for the evening sky. Once poured, I swirl them together using a little stick, just enough to make it look like the wind's blowing through a spooky October night. While the resin cures, I'll move over to the silhouettes. I found this design online, and I'll put the link in the description. I sized the design accordingly and print it right onto the black cardstock and carefully cut out each trick-or-treater with an X-Acto knife. It's slow, it's a little meticulous, but honestly kind of relaxing and oddly satisfying when they pop out. With the first layer dry, it's time to set the lights. I decided to use clear tape and hope that it works to keep the strand secured to the bottom nice and flat. Then I pour the next layer of resin on top. This time I mix in a bit of white sparkle for some Halloween magic. And then another layer of purple for the sky. Then it's a quick pass with the heat gun to pop all the bubbles and blend the colors just a bit more. Once that has cured, I can glue down my trick-or-treaters. Then it's one more coat of clear epoxy to get them secured in place. A sprinkle of sparkle dust for good measure, and now we wait. All right, moment of truth. Everything's dry. Will my olive oil experiment pay off? Yeah, it paid off. The board popped right out. I can then just wipe off any excess, and the whole bottom looks really great. But not everything looks great. A few of the silhouettes floated up, which is something I'll have to address at some point. But first I have to deal with all these rough edges. These are areas in which the epoxy has stayed in the mold, of course, but has kind of leaked around the outside of the wood. To clean this up, it's over to the table saw. I got a little bit lucky here in that my on-off switch was recessed enough into the wood that it left me enough material that could be cut off and straightened out without touching the on-off switch. Then I'll do the other three sides, and this thing's looking pretty neat, pretty square. After that, the whole thing gets a solid sanding, which unfortunately exposes a few more issues. The head of my witch and my devil have some sort of bubble, and the paper that did float up over the epoxy gets sanded off and lost. Not a problem. We'll drill a few holes so it can be filled in again with a little bit more epoxy. As far as the pieces of paper that have been sanded off, I'll touch up those spots with a paint marker and hope that it works. Sometimes woodworking is 90% problem solving and 10% hoping that no one notices. Okay, time for the final pour. Coat number 4. Tape off the light switch to keep all the epoxy out. Say a small prayer to the Halloween gods that this final coat of epoxy fills all the bubbles and the paint marker doesn't run. With that, I pour on the last layer. First impression, I think it's working pretty well. One more blast with the heat gun gets all the bubbles out. This thing looking really nice and smooth. And then I'll just let it cure. The next day, with everything set, I can come back and remove the tape, hoping that no epoxy got on. And with my fingers crossed, I can make sure that these lights still work. Nice. Then I gotta pay a little attention to the bottom. Start with an 80 grit to remove any drips of the epoxy and work my way up to 400. If this were the top, I'd probably go all the way up to 2000 grit. But since it's the bottom, we'll call it good enough. For some feet, I'll throw on these stick-on bumpers. And this thing's done. This piece ended up coming out really good. The epoxy, crystal clear, nice and shiny, and I'm so happy that I added those white sparkles because it gives this piece some movement even without the lights turned on. And when the lights are turned on, it looks really great. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. It's not a hard project, it just takes patience, mostly waiting for the resin to cure. If I were to do this again, I'd probably do some things differently. I'd clean up the switch area and maybe consider just painting the silhouettes from the beginning instead of messing with the paper at all. But overall, I'd call this one a glowing success. Thanks for watching. Have a happy Halloween, and may your epoxy always cure hauntingly beautiful.